So we are on Tuesday of the third week of Advent. It's also December 17th. And typically in the church, on this day, we begin a kind of 9-day novena towards Christmas. For certain churches who have the tradition of the dawn masses, it begins today also. So the particular characteristic of this time of 9 days is to relook at the birth narratives of Jesus, the original story of how the birth of Jesus took place. So it gives us a kind of a sense of history or the historical setting of the birth of Jesus. So in other words, it was something that really happened in history. So the readings for today are Genesis chapter 49, verse 2, and then 8 to 10. Genesis 49, verse 2, and verses 8 to 10, which speaks about Judah being appointed by Jacob as the head of all his brothers. And Psalm 72, verses 1 to 8. Psalm 72, verses 1 to 8, and verse 17. And the response is, "Justice shall flourish in his time, and fullness of peace forever." Justice shall flourish in his time, and fullness of peace forever. Of course, this psalm points towards the Messiah who is to come, and he will bring with him fullness of peace and justice. And the gospel is taken from Matthew 1, 1 to 17. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 to 17. So the gospel of today speaks of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Typically on this day, we go through a long list of names that many times we don't understand why we are going through them. In fact, it speaks of the beginning of the history of the line of Jesus, if we like. It begins from Abraham as the father of faith, the first, we can say the first man or the first one who was called by God to establish the people Israel. So from Abraham to Jesse, the father of King David, we have 14 generations. And then from King David to the Babylonian exile, we have another 14 generations. And after the Babylonian exile, until the person of Jesus Christ, we have yet another 14 generations. So this is somehow a historical perspective that Jesus actually came from a very concrete line of people, of peoples even, and that's a human line. Today's genealogy helps us to see the dignity of being human. Many times when we say, we're only human, it's human to do this or do that, sometimes we have quite a negative idea of what it means to be human. The whole purpose that Jesus takes on this line, and it shows us the concrete history of people who came before him, is that he wants to be human. He chooses humanity to be his and to participate in it. And by doing so, he gives it dignity. In the Mass, when the priest celebrates and prepares the offertory, and then he normally pours wine and water together, there's something that he says that can give us the significance of what it means that Jesus took on a human line, and actually a line of sinners. And the priest normally says, "By the mystery of this water and wine, may we share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity." So that what Christ is doing in the Eucharist, what Christ is doing when he's born as a human being in the line of David, is to take on our humanity so that we can become divine. So somehow our human lives, the story of our lives, if you like, is a chance for us to allow God to show his divinity. And that is somehow at the crux of being a saint, of being divine or holy. So today, this line of 14 times 3 is a very concrete sign of how Jesus exchanges his divinity for our humanity, so that we could be divine like him. Now there's something very interesting about this line of people that is written in the Gospel of Matthew. And the point here is not only that they're human, but they're all kinds of people. And I would say it's a line of sinners. Why do I say sinners? I would just like to highlight the names of some of the people here. Abraham himself. Did you know in the story of Abraham, he actually exchanged his own wife Sarah for the favors of the king? That is really unthinkable to do. Jacob, who's mentioned the father of the 12 tribes, actually stole the heirloom from his brother Esau in order to inherit what God has blessed his father with. Not only the men, the women too. Rahab was known to be a prostitute when Joshua was going to enter with sending some of his spies into Canaan. She was the one who welcomed them, and she was a prostitute. And of course we know about Solomon. Solomon was the illegitimate child, so-called, of David when he had an affair with Bathsheba, and whose husband he killed. So if you look at the line where Jesus came from, it wasn't a perfect line of holy, so-called holy people. It was people with their weaknesses, people with their faults, people who were sinful. And even when we talk about the Babylonian exile, it was a punishment from God of the people Israel, and they lost everything in there. So it was a very colorful history before Jesus came. And there's something very significant when Jesus comes to take on this line of people and makes them that history of salvation, where he comes to start everything anew again. If you like, a kind of title we can have for the gospel of today is this: allow Jesus to rewrite the story of your life. Allow Jesus to write once again the story of your life. This is the good news that we're saying here, is no matter what we have lived through, no matter the history of our lives, no matter what the story was before, Advent or Christmas is a time to allow Jesus to write it all anew again. Some of us may say, hey, maybe I don't need that kind of rewriting of my story. I like it, or nothing is wrong and things are all right. But deep inside all our hearts, we are looking for that newness that only God can give. Not only because we're sinful, not only because we're bad people, but because this newness for us creatures comes only from the Creator, and only He can bless us with the newness that we are looking for. When we look at this line once again, and we said there, we can even identify a line of sinners, there's something very concrete that happened in all of them. In each one of them, Abraham, Jacob, Rahab, David, the people of Israel, the concrete thing that happened was a very deep change of heart, a conversion experience. So even though they were living in a certain way that was not pleasing to God, there was a call of God deep within them that changed their hearts. And because of that change, God rewrote the story of their lives. For example, with David. David sinned before God with his affair with Bathsheba, and even the murder of Uriah, her husband. But because he converted, because he repented, and there was a change of heart, God blessed the very fruit of that sin to be the new king of Israel. In fact, Solomon was the actual king who developed Israel in its greatest splendor. And that was the fruit of a sinner who had a change of heart. What does a person need in order to rewrite the story of their lives with Jesus? Simply a change of heart, humility, coming to God and saying, Lord, I don't really like what's been going on in my life today, and I want to change. And to believe that Christ comes precisely for that change. That is why we call Jesus Savior. In fact, the word Jesus, or the name Jesus, means God saves. If we believe in this identity of God as our Savior, that He can redeem things that were lost, He can fix things that we considered were broken, whether it's our lives, whether it's our love story, sometimes even our marriages, There's so many things that we can consider as broken, and sometimes it's our own hearts. Christmas, Advent is a time to allow Jesus to say, you know, I am your Savior. I am God, and I've come to heal and to allow you to start all over again, to start anew, to give you the newness, the love, the peace, and the fullness of joy that all our hearts are longing for. Being a saint or growing in holiness is about recognizing Jesus as our Savior. And the question maybe we could have today in our reflection is, how is your faith in God as your Savior? How strong is your faith in Jesus that He can really save and redeem and fix things in our lives? Because it all depends on our faith that we will look for it. We will have this change of heart, not just that we change for the better or try to do good things, but that we have a basic change of disposition in our attitude towards God. That we open our hearts and allow Him to come fully in and say, Lord, I need you. Lord, I want to depend on you. Lord, I want you to be my Lord, my King, my God, as St. Thomas said also before Jesus. So once again, the invitation of today, allow God to write a new story in your life with Jesus. Allow Jesus to be the Savior, the Redeemer, who can rewrite everything. As we see in the genealogy of Jesus, there's nothing to be ashamed about in our past. The past is past. And this is something that's so important for us to move forward. Let bygones be bygones, but most of all, let us forgive the past. Let's leave it behind and start anew in all our relationships with ourselves, first of all, which is very important, with God, in a new relationship with God, and with others in a new relationship. Forgive everything, forgive everyone. God gives us the capacity in coming to us during this Advent. Forgive and ask the divine grace also to forget, so that as we come together in Christmas during this time, with family, with friends, with people we've fallen in love with and people we've fallen out of love with, that we can really come as a reconciled family, saying, you know, we give thanks for the past, we look forward to the future together, and let's work with enthusiasm in the present, because God has the power to rewrite our present and our story from today.